The entire gym stopped breathing the moment Officer Callum Reeves backed the young woman into the corner of the mat. She was wearing hospital scrubs. She had a stethoscope still hanging around her neck. She looked like she had taken a wrong turn on the way to her shift and ended up standing in front of a decorated police black belt who outweighed her by 60 pounds and had a wall full of tournament trophies to prove what he could do. Everyone in that gym was waiting for her to apologize, to step back, to disappear. Not one of them knew that before the hospital badge, before the quiet apartment and the early morning shifts, this woman had spent 4 years embedded with Army Special Operations units in environments where hesitation meant body bags. Not one of them knew she had already calculated exactly how to end this in under 3 seconds. Before this story goes any further, if you are watching this, hit subscribe right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Like this video and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. Nora Voss had not planned on walking into Steel Mark Combat Academy on a Tuesday evening in early October. She had planned on going home, eating whatever was left in her refrigerator, and sleeping for 9 hours before her next double shift at Hargrove Memorial Hospital in Caldwell, Oregon. That was the plan. The plan changed when she got a text from the mother of a 14-year-old boy named Marcus Tilley. Marcus had been Nora's patient 6 weeks earlier. He came into the emergency department after a car accident that left him with a fractured collarbone, a mild concussion, and a fear response so severe that the attending physician had flagged it for psychiatric follow-up. The accident had not been random. A group of older kids had forced his bicycle off the road deliberately, and Marcus had spent his hospital stay barely speaking, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of someone trying to make himself smaller than the room. Nora had sat with him during 2 of her breaks. She had not offered speeches. She had just stayed. His mother, Dina Tilley, had texted Nora that afternoon. He finally agreed to try the youth martial arts program. Tonight is his first class. He's terrified. I thought you should know, since you're the reason he agreed to go. Nora had stared at that message for a long time in the hospital parking lot. Then she drove to Steel Mark Combat Academy instead of home. The gym sat on the edge of Caldwell's warehouse district, wedged between a tire shop and a storage facility that had seen better decades. The exterior was painted matte black with the gym's name in block letters above a steel door. Inside, the smell hit first: rubber mats, sweat, and the faint chemical edge of spray disinfectant that never quite won the battle. The main floor was large, lit with overhead fluorescents that washed everything in flat white light. Heavy bags lined the far wall. A cage stood in the back corner. The main training area was a raised platform covered in layered competition mats, surrounded by a low barrier. Maybe 40 people were present that evening. A mixed crowd. Teenagers in the youth program, adult students of various ages, a cluster of parents seated along the wall with the uncomfortable posture of people who had nowhere good to look. 2 instructors moved through the space, one running a warm-up drill with the younger group. Nora spotted Marcus immediately. He was standing at the edge of the youth group, arms crossed, shoulders drawn up toward his ears. He was technically present. He was not actually there yet. She found Dina near the parent seating and sat beside her without announcing herself. Dina turned, startled, then immediately teared up. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "I was in the neighborhood," Nora said, which was not remotely true. She watched the youth session begin. The instructor working with the younger group was patient, a woman named Sarah, who had a calm, deliberate manner and a talent for making scared kids feel less exposed. Marcus did not participate fully, but he stopped looking at the exit after about 15 minutes, which Nora counted as progress. The problem was not in the youth session. The problem walked out of the back office 20 minutes into the evening and took over the adult training floor. Officer Callum Reeves was 36 years old and built like someone who had been training since before he knew what training meant. 6'2", around 210 pounds of structured muscle, carrying himself with the particular confidence of a man who had never lost in a room where it mattered to him. He wore a black GI with a department patch on the shoulder. He was a certified defensive tactics instructor for the Caldwell PD, which he made sure the room understood within the first 3 minutes of his arrival through a combination of posture, volume, and the way everyone stepped back when he approached the mat. He was not technically the head instructor at Steelmark, but nobody seemed willing to tell him that. "Who's got new people tonight?" he called out, scanning the adult floor. Three adults raised their hands with the energy of students who had just been caught unprepared in class. Reeves walked a slow circle around them, the way someone might inspect merchandise, assessing, unhurried. "You," he said to a heavy-set man in his 40s, "why do you think you're here?" The man hesitated. "To learn self-defense?" "Wrong. You're here because somewhere along the line you figured out you can't protect yourself, and that bothers you enough to finally do something about it. Own that." It was not the worst motivational speech Nora had ever heard. The delivery was another matter. There was something performative about it, a quality that had less to do with instruction and more to do with establishing who held the floor. She had seen that behavior before, in a different context, with a different uniform. She recognized it for what it was: authority deployed not to lift people up, but to remind them where they stood in relation to the person wielding it. She set it aside and watched Marcus, who had graduated from crossing his arms to standing with his hands at his sides. Small movement, real one. 40 minutes into the evening, Reeves turned his attention to the youth group. He did not do it gently. He walked to the edge of the raised mat area where Sarah's session was winding down and inserted himself without asking, calling out corrections to the kids' technique in a volume that carried across the entire gym. A few of the children straightened up, eager to perform for the authority figure. Several went rigid. Marcus went rigid. "You," Reeves said, pointing at a kid near Marcus. A small boy, maybe 12, with a soft face and the build of someone who had not hit a growth spurt yet. "Stance is wrong. You're standing like you're waiting for a bus. You want someone to walk up and take your lunch. Keep standing like that." The boy's face went red. He adjusted his feet. "Wrong again. Watch." Reeves stepped onto the mat and demonstrated, then walked the boy through a correction with physical adjustments that were not rough, exactly, but were not careful either. He grabbed the kid's shoulders and shifted him with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone repositioning furniture. The boy flinched. Reeves did not notice or did not care to. Marcus had gone back to staring at the exit. Nora was already on her feet. She walked to the edge of the mat, keeping her voice level. "Excuse me." Reeves turned. He looked at her the way people sometimes look at strangers who speak to them in lines at the grocery store. Not hostile immediately, just waiting to determine if this was worth his time. "He flinched," Nora said. "That correction could have been done without grabbing him." Reeves studied her for a moment. Scrubs, stethoscope, no gear bag, no hand wraps on the bench beside her. Not a student. "Are you a parent?" he asked. "No, I'm a nurse." That kid has a startle response. Physical contact without warning in a stress environment can reinforce avoidance, not correct it. The room had gone slightly quieter in the vicinity of their conversation. Not silent. The heavy bags were still moving, music still playing from the front desk area. But a few people within range had slowed down. Reeves smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I appreciate the medical opinion. I've been teaching defensive tactics for 9 years. I think I know how to handle a training floor. And I've spent years in environments where getting the fear response wrong got people killed," Nora said. "I'm not questioning your credentials. I'm telling you what I observed." The smile stayed fixed. "You should probably head back to your hospital." Nora held his gaze for 2 more seconds, then looked at Sarah. "Is there a quieter space where the youth group can finish cool down?" Sarah nodded quickly, grateful, and began guiding the kids toward the side of the gym. Marcus went with them, which was what Nora had wanted. She returned to her seat beside Dina. "That was brave," Dina said quietly. "That was a Tuesday," Nora said. But she watched Reeves for the rest of the evening with the careful attention of someone who had learned, in places where the stakes were permanent, to assess a threat before it materialized. She came back Thursday. She told herself it was for Marcus, which was partly true. He had texted her through his mother with a message that said, "Okay, it wasn't terrible," which from a traumatized 14-year-old with an avoidance pattern constituted a standing ovation. She wanted to see him in the space a second time. She wanted to make sure the Tuesday dynamic did not repeat without someone present who would say something. Reeves was there again. He was always there, it turned out. He ran 4 of the 7 weekly sessions for adult students and had positioned himself as the gym's most visible instructor by sheer force of presence. Thursday's session was more aggressive. Reeves ran a sparring rotation and made it clear that going light was not respected. He praised students who came in hard and called out those who hesitated, as if hesitation were a character defect, rather than a normal stage in learning a contact sport. An adult student, a woman in her late 20s, training for maybe a month based on her comfort level with the basic positions, got paired with a male student considerably larger and more experienced. Reeves watched them spar. When she covered up defensively after taking a solid shot to the headgear, he stopped the round. "Don't run," he said. "That's not how you survive contact. You cover and run. Someone takes you apart on the street. Fight back." The woman nodded, jaw tight, and reset. She was trying. The trying was obvious and real. She took another shot in the same exchange, harder this time. Her partner had heard Reeves' instruction too and applied it liberally. Nora watched the woman's neck snap slightly to the side with the impact. She watched Reeves give a small nod of approval. This time, Nora did not go to the mat. She went to the front desk. The desk was staffed by a teenage girl named Britt, who handled check-ins and merchandise, and who looked like she had developed an elaborate system for avoiding eye contact with Reeves. Nora asked to speak with the gym's owner or head instructor. "That's Coach Larkin," Britt said. "He's usually here weekends. During the week, it's mostly Officer Reeves running things." "Is there a way to reach Coach Larkin?" Britt looked at the door to the back office, then back at Nora. Then she wrote a number on a sticky note and slid it across the desk without comment. The following Saturday, Nora met with Coach Warren Larkin in his office. He was a compact man in his early 60s with a broken nose that had healed twice at different angles, and the careful listening posture of someone who had been in enough bad situations to understand the value of information before action. She told him what she had seen. She was specific: dates, incidents, names where she had them. She was not emotional about it. She had written a few notes on her phone beforehand. Larkin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Reeves brings in students," he said finally. "I know. He's got a following. His certifications are legitimate. The department sends recruits here." "I know that too." "You're telling me things I may have already heard parts of." "Then you have more than parts now," Nora said. "A woman took a significant shot Thursday that she was not ready for. A 12-year-old flinched hard from physical contact that could have been avoided. These are not borderline observations. This is a pattern." Larkin looked at the wall behind her for a moment, the way people do when they are weighing something they already know against the discomfort of acting on it. "I'll have a conversation with him," he said. "All right. I'm not promising it goes further than that." "I'm not asking for promises," Nora said. "I'm providing information. What you do with it is your business." She left the office without knowing whether anything would change. The odds, based on the structure of what she was looking at, a revenue-generating instructor with departmental backing operating inside a small independent gym, were not encouraging. She had worked in institutions long enough to know that patterns like Reeves tended to persist until the cost of persistence exceeded the cost of change. She went home. She worked her next 3 shifts. She thought about Marcus on the drive-in one morning and decided to check in through Dina. Dina responded within minutes. He went back on his own. Signed up for the Youth Month trial. Still quiet, but he's going. Nora drove the rest of the way to Hargrove Memorial with the specific satisfaction of a person who had done one thing right in a week of complicated things. The conversation Larkin had with Reeves had apparently gone poorly. Nora learned this through Sarah, who texted her 10 days after the Saturday meeting with the compressed urgency of someone who could not say what they needed to say in person. "He knows someone complained. He's been asking around." I don't think Larkin told him who, but Callum is not subtle about this kind of thing. He's been harder in session since the conversation, like he's proving something. Nora had expected this. She had not expected the next part. He singled out a new student last night in front of everyone. Woman named Petra. She's been coming 3 weeks. Made her demonstrate a technique she didn't know yet, and when she got it wrong, he told the class. She was an example of someone who comes to a gym to feel good about themselves instead of actually train. She left and didn't come back. 3 other students who were there said they're thinking about leaving too. Nora set her phone face down on the break room table and sat with it for a moment. Then she texted back, "Is Marcus still going?" "Yes, but Reeves has started running crossover drills where youth and adult groups share space. Marcus was on the mat edge last night when Reeves was running adults. I watched it. Marcus barely moved for 20 minutes. She picked up her phone and called Dina. Dina answered on the second ring, and from her voice, Nora could tell she was already worried. "I was going to call you," Dina said. Tell me what you know. Marcus came home quiet last night. Different quiet from usual. He would not talk to me about the gym. That's not how he's been. He's been talking about it a little, actually, which has been really good. Last night was different. Did he say anything? He said one of the instructors yelled at another kid on the mat during the shared drill. He said it scared him. Did it scare him into not wanting to go back? A pause. He didn't say that. He said he wanted to go back. He said, Dina's voice shifted. He said he wanted to figure out how to not be scared of someone like that. He's 14, Nora. That's a 14-year-old trying to work out how to be brave in a place that has a bully in it. Nora said nothing for a moment. I'll go Thursday, she said. Well, Thursday was different from the start. The gym was fuller than usual. A local law enforcement training group had come in to observe Reeves' defensive tactics demonstrations. Half a dozen officers in athletic gear sitting along the wall beside the usual parent section. Reeves was performing. The energy in the room had the particular voltage of a man who had an audience he wanted to impress and students he intended to use to impress them. The adult session ran first. Reeves pushed the pace harder than usual, pairing more experienced students against newer ones in ways that were not about learning. A man named Garrett, Nora had learned the regulars by now, was paired with a college student named Jay, who had been training perhaps 6 weeks. Garrett outweighed Jay by 40 pounds and had 2 years on him. The round was not instructional. It was a demonstration of what happened when Reeves wanted to show his colleagues that his students could handle contact. Jay ended the round breathing hard through his mouth, with his hand pressed against his ribs. He insisted he was fine. His face said otherwise. Then Reeves called the youth group onto the shared mat space. It was supposed to be an observation drill, kids watching the adult students demonstrate fundamental techniques, standard curriculum. Nora had seen it done at other gyms. Done correctly, it was genuinely educational for younger students. Reeves did not do it correctly. He called Marcus onto the mat. Not any of the more experienced youth students. Not the kids who had been training months. He called the boy who had flinched, who had spent 6 weeks rebuilding something fragile, who had been Nora's primary reason for being in this building at all. You, Reeves said, pointing. Come show us a defensive stance. Marcus walked onto the mat with the careful movements of someone crossing ice. He got into position. His stance was not perfect. He had been training 5 weeks, but it was recognizable and showed effort. Reeves looked at his colleagues along the wall and spread his hands in a gesture that invited them to find the flaws that were obvious to experienced eyes. Several of them smiled. It was not a malicious smile from their perspective. They were just sharing a professional moment. But Marcus saw those smiles. His stance collapsed slightly. Not much. Just enough. That, Reeves said to the room, is what happens when someone comes in and goes through the motions without committing. You see the hips? The shoulder line? He's already deciding he's going to lose before anyone's touched him. Marcus was 14 years old. He was standing on a mat in front of 20 adults and the law enforcement observers, and the instructor who ran this space had just told the room that his body language was already surrendering. Nora was on her feet. She did not rush. She walked to the edge of the mat at a pace that was deliberate and without apology. The room tracked her movement because the room was keyed up enough to track any movement. Coach Reeves, she said, I need you to stop. Reeves looked at her with the expression of someone who had expected to have to deal with her again and had prepared for it. We're in the middle of a session. I know, step off the mat for a moment. You don't give instructions on my training floor. This student is 14 years old, and he is currently experiencing a stress response that is going to do lasting damage to his willingness to train. I'm telling you this as a medical professional, not as someone who wants to argue with you in front of your colleagues. The room was quiet now. The law enforcement observers had stopped talking among themselves. Parents along the wall had straightened. Sarah had moved to stand near the youth group. Reeves stepped toward the edge of the mat, not toward her in an aggressive way, but in the manner of someone closing a distance to make a private conversation unavoidable. He lowered his voice to the level where only she could hear. You need to leave this building. I know you went to Larkin. I know you've been talking to my students. I don't know what your problem is with how I run this floor, but you're interfering with a licensed instruction program, and I will call the department and report an unauthorized individual causing disruption at this facility. Do that, Nora said, voice flat. But do it after you let that kid off the mat. He's fine. He's not fine. Look at him. Reeves glanced at Marcus. For a fraction of a second, something passed across his face that might have been the beginning of a more honest assessment. Then it closed. He needs to learn that discomfort is part of training, Reeves said. There is a difference between training discomfort and public humiliation in front of an audience that includes uniformed officers. That difference matters clinically, and it matters here. Reeves stepped back onto the mat and turned toward the room, addressing the group with practiced calm, as if the exchange had been a minor administrative note. We'll take 5. Youth group, go with instructor Sarah. Sarah moved immediately, gathering the youth students with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this outcome. Marcus moved with them. He did not look at Nora. He did not look at Reeves. He looked at the floor with the concentrated stillness of someone keeping something inside. Nora watched him go, and when she turned back, Reeves was looking at her with a different quality of attention than he had shown before. Thursday evening next week, he said. Intermediate sparring session. I want you on the mat. I'm not a student here. Then sign up, or don't. Either way, I think it's time we settle what you actually know versus what you think you know about training. He said it at normal volume, without lowering his voice this time. The law enforcement observers heard it. Several parents heard it. The adult students who had been milling during the break heard it. Full contact, gear provided. You want to tell me how to run a training floor, then show me you know what a training floor actually is. Nora looked at him. She thought about Marcus standing on that mat with the crumbled stance. She thought about Petra, who had been walked out in front of a class and mocked until she left. She thought about Jay, pressing his hand against his ribs and insisting he was fine. She thought about the 4 years she had spent in places where the men around her had made the same calculation about her that Reeves was making right now, and about what had happened when they found out they were wrong. I'll be here Thursday, she said. She drove home in the particular silence that settles after a decision that cannot be undecided. Her apartment was small and deliberately sparse. She had owned it for 3 years and furnished it with the minimum necessary, the habit of someone who had lived out of a pack long enough that accumulation felt like liability. The single piece of wall decor was a framed topographical map of a mountain range she had once spent 11 days moving through under conditions that would not fit into a gym story. She did not think of it as decoration. She thought of it as a reminder of what she already knew about herself. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and looked at nothing for a while. Then she called a number she had not called in 8 months. The line rang 4 times before a voice she recognized immediately answered with the brisk economy of someone who answered every call, expecting it to be operational in nature. Voss, said Master Sergeant Delray Holt, retired. It's been a minute. 8 months, she said. You counting or complaining? Neither. I have a question. Ask it. If someone challenges you publicly in a room full of people with something to prove, and you know you can end it in under 30 seconds, and the point of showing up is not to hurt him but to make it impossible for him to keep doing what he's been doing, how do you calibrate that? A pause. Is this a real situation or a hypothetical? It's a Thursday situation. Holt was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing in the measured way he had of doing everything. Even breathing was a considered action with Holt. You calibrate it by remembering that the goal is the outcome, not the technique. You go in thinking about what you want the room to look like when it's over, not about what you're going to do to get there. He's bigger than me. They always are. He has a following, law enforcement contacts. He's been doing this long enough that people have decided he must be right because he hasn't been stopped yet. Voss? What? What do you actually need from me right now? She looked at the topographical map on her wall, at the contour lines of terrain she had moved through in the dark, with people she would trust with her life, through conditions that had no scoring system and no padded mats, where the measure of success was simply whether everyone came home. I need to know I'm not making this worse, she said. You walked into a room with a kid who was terrified and you made it safer for 6 weeks, Holt said. Whether Thursday is smart or not, that part was right. She sat with that. The other thing, he said, you've been out 3 years. Don't assume the timeline is shorter than it used to be. I train. I know you train. You know what I mean. She did know what he meant. She had been careful about it. She had gone to a boxing gym twice a week for 2 years. She ran trails. She kept up the technical work in her apartment with the methodical consistency of someone who understood that the things she knew how to do were worth maintaining, even when she hoped she would never use them. She was not what she had been at 25, deployed and sharp and operating at the edge of what a body could sustain. But she was not a hospital worker who had never thrown a punch in her life, which was what Reeves believed he had challenged. "I'll be all right," she said. "I know you will," Holt said. "That's not what I was worried about." She did not ask what he was worried about, because she already knew. He was worried about what happened to the room after. He was worried about whether Reeves, whatever came of Thursday, had people in his corner who would make the aftermath complicated. He was worried about the thing that always came after an action that worked, the second problem, which was usually harder than the first. "I'll call you Friday," she said. "I'll answer," he said, and ended the call. She closed her laptop and went to bed and slept for 7 hours, which was 3 more hours than she usually managed, which was either the sleep of someone at peace with a decision or the body conserving what it would need. She did not figure out which until much later. Thursday arrived with the particular quality of ordinary days that carry extraordinary interiors. Nora worked a full shift at Hargrove Memorial. She sutured a laceration on a construction worker's forearm. She managed a pediatric fever that turned out to be less serious than the parents feared and more stressful than the parents understood while they were in the waiting room. She talked a 67-year-old man through the process of explaining his medication history to an attending who had 12 patients in queue and not enough time. She changed out of her scrubs in the hospital locker room. She had brought a bag, athletic shorts, a compression top, her worn training shoes. She had not bought new gear for this. She had not wanted to. She drove to Steelmark in the early evening when the sky over Caldwell was doing something complicated with orange and gray that she did not have the attention to appreciate tonight. The gym was fuller than Thursday usually was. Word had traveled, which she had expected. In small contained communities, gyms, units, hospital departments, word always traveled. She recognized most of the faces. Several she did not. Reeves was at the center of the floor in full gear working a combination on a heavy bag with the focused energy of someone who had been thinking about this since the previous Thursday. His colleagues from the law enforcement group were present again. The observer configuration had expanded. Coach Larkin was also present, standing against the far wall, with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who understood that something was about to happen in his building that was no longer entirely within his control. He met Nora's eyes when she walked in. She gave him a small nod. He gave her a longer one back that she interpreted as an acknowledgement of more than the moment. Reeves spotted her from across the gym. He said nothing. He turned back to the heavy bag and hit it 3 more times with the measured aggression of a man performing for a room that was watching him perform. Marcus was present. Youth group, near the side wall, technically there for the standard early session. But he had not gone into the changing area with the other youth students. He was standing near the adult section, small and still, watching the floor. Nora walked over to him. "You heard," she said. "Everybody heard," Marcus said. "You don't have to stay for this part." He looked at her. He was 14 and not large for it, and he had a broken collarbone that had healed clean and a fear response that was slowly, imperfectly, non-linearly improving. He looked at her with the eyes of someone trying to work out whether the thing they thought was true was actually true. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. The question landed somewhere Nora had not expected. "Yeah," she said. "I'm going to be okay." Marcus nodded slowly. He did not move away from the adult section. She let him stay. She walked to the equipment area and began pulling on the required safety gear, headgear, mouthguard, gloves. Her hands moved through the process with the automatic ease of a person who had worn gear in conditions far less structured than this one. The gym's standard sparring rules required it. She was fine with the rules. Reeves walked to the center of the mat and turned to face the room. "We'll run a standard full-contact sparring demonstration," he announced to the assembled audience. "This is a training environment and all safety protocols apply." A pause. Performative. "Our guest tonight is a medical professional who has some concerns about how this gym operates. I believe the best way to address those concerns is to let the floor speak for itself." A few chuckles from his side of the room. The parents were quiet. The law enforcement observers had that professional stillness of people waiting to evaluate. Nora walked onto the mat. She had not taken off her jacket yet. Reeves looked at it. She reached up and unzipped it and pulled it off and set it at the edge of the mat, and then she turned to face him. The jacket's absence changed things. It changed things because what it revealed was not the soft uncertainty of someone who had been playing dress-up in a combat sport facility. The compression top she wore left her arms visible, the arms of someone who ran weighted trails twice a week, who trained with a heavy bag in her apartment, who had spent formative years carrying a medic pack through terrain that did not care how tired she was. Functional muscle, not display. The kind that comes from doing things, not preparing to look like you do things. She also stood differently now. She had not realized she was doing it consciously. It was just what happened when she stepped onto a mat with intent. The posture shifted, the weight distribution changed, the quality of stillness in her body became something other than stillness. Several of the adults in the room registered this change without being able to articulate what specifically had changed. Reeves registered it. Something passed across his face. Not fear, not yet, because he was too certain of himself for fear to find a foothold that fast, but a recalibration. The first hairline fracture in the assessment he had been running since the previous Thursday when he had looked at a woman in scrubs and seen an easy lesson. He raised his gloves. She raised hers. The timer started. Reeves came in fast. Which was exactly what she had expected. He led with a jab-cross combination, textbook opening, designed to establish range and test her reaction time. It was clean and it was practiced, and it was the kind of sequence a man throws when he is confident it will work, and he wants the room to see how effortlessly it works. The jab caught air. The cross caught her guard. She felt the weight of it through her forearms, which told her something useful about how much he was holding back, which was not very much. She circled left. He reset and came again, this time with more intent. A body shot followed by a high kick that had genuine technique behind it. She checked the kick with her lead leg, absorbed the body shot without retreating, and answered with a single counter to his ribs that was short and not theatrical, and landed in the space between his elbow and hip where he had left a gap by committing too hard to the kick. Reeves took half a step back. Not far. Not enough for anyone watching to call it a retreat, but enough. The room registered it anyway. The particular silence of 40 people recalibrating what they thought they were watching settled over the gym like a change in air pressure. The law enforcement observers along the wall had stopped their quiet conversation. A few of the parents had leaned forward. Reeves shook it off and moved. He was not panicking. He was experienced enough not to panic at one exchange. But his next sequence was different in quality from the first. Less performance in it, more actual effort. He caught her with a glancing shot to the temple on the next exchange. Her head moved with it, which was training and not accident. She took what she could not avoid cleanly and gave it nowhere to land solidly. Stars at the edge of her vision for half a second, brief and manageable. She had been hit harder in places with fewer witnesses and no mat beneath her. She used his momentum from that sequence to create an angle and put 2 more shots into the same rib space she had found before, then stepped out before he could clinch. He grabbed for her anyway, catching her right arm, trying to drag her into a grappling exchange where his size advantage would dictate terms. She let him pull for exactly 1 second, long enough for him to commit his weight, and then rolled under his grip with a movement that came from a different vocabulary than sport grappling. She ended up outside his arm with her weight behind his back hip, and she placed her hand there, the lightest touch, which was all it would take to put him on the mat if she wanted him there. She did not put him on the mat. She stepped back instead. Reeves turned around and looked at her with an expression she recognized from her past, in a different way than she had recognized his bullying tactics. This was the face of someone who had just been shown the size of the gap between where they thought they were and where they actually stood, and had not yet decided what to do with that information. "Where'd you train?" he said, loud enough for the room. "Army," she said. Same volume. The word hit the room differently than she expected. She had not said it as an announcement or a reveal. She had said it the way she said most things, without decoration. But the room heard it as an announcement, because the room was primed for narrative, and the narrative had just shifted. Several of the law enforcement observers straightened. One of them, a woman in her late 30s with the bearing of someone senior, crossed her arms differently than she had before. Not closed off, but attentive in the way of someone filing information. Reeves came in again, and now the quality of his effort had changed completely. He was fighting, not demonstrating. The performance had burned off, and what was underneath it was real training and genuine competitive instinct, and she respected that more than she had respected the performance, which did not mean she was going to let him land cleanly. The next 2 minutes were different from the first exchange. He pushed her, actually pushed her, and there were 2 moments where she had to work to maintain her positioning and 1 moment where she took a shot to the jaw that was solid enough to make her reassess her angle. She adjusted. She was slower than she had been at 25, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that, and the adjustment accommodated it. She stopped trying to counter on his timeline and started waiting for the moments when his own aggression created the openings. They came. They always came, with fighters who believed in their size. When the round ended, a buzzer from the timer that Britt at the front desk had set at Reeves's earlier instruction, both of them were breathing hard. Nora's jaw ached where the shot had landed. Her ribs had taken 3 solid hits and would be speaking to her in the morning. Reeves had a split in his lower lip from a counter she had landed in the final 20 seconds. He was touching it with his tongue, feeling the shape of it. His rib situation was going to be worse than hers, she suspected, because she had found that same spot 4 separate times with varying levels of force. The room was completely quiet. Warren Larkin, against the far wall, had uncrossed his arms. Reeves turned to face the room with the deliberate control of a man performing composure, while composure did not come naturally. He pulled off his headgear and held it at his side. "Good round," he said, loud enough for everyone. It was the most carefully calibrated 2 words he had spoken all evening, and everyone understood what they were. Not a compliment, not a concession, but a strategic retreat to a position he could defend. Good round meant he was choosing the frame. Good round meant this was an athletic exchange between peers. Good round meant nothing had been revealed or overturned. Nora pulled off her own headgear. Her hair was damp and her jaw hurt, and she looked at Reeves with the flat assessment of someone who knew exactly what good round was covering for. "The youth session starts in 20 minutes, she said to the room, without directing it at him specifically. "I'm going to suggest the youth group runs it with instructor Sarah without the shared mat space tonight." She was not asking. The way she said it made that clear. Sarah moved before anyone else processed the suggestion, already gathering the youth students, already moving them toward the separated side space where the air was different. Marcus went with the group. He glanced back at Nora once, a brief look that she caught and held for the second it took him to turn away. His face was not frightened. That was new. Reeves did not contradict the suggestion about the youth session. That was also new. The aftermath of what happened in that gym on a Thursday evening in October spread through Caldwell's law enforcement and martial arts communities, the way things spread in small professional circles. Not all at once, but in waves, each wave bringing more detail and more distortion. By the following Monday, Nora had received 3 texts from numbers she did not recognize, 2 of which were positive, 1 of which was not. By Wednesday, Sarah had called to tell her that 6 of the adult students who had been thinking about leaving the gym had decided to stay, and that Petra, the woman Reeves had humiliated and driven out, had been contacted by 2 of them and was considering returning. None of that changed what Nora saw when she showed up to her shift at Hargrove Memorial on Tuesday morning. What she saw was a man sitting in the waiting area of the emergency department who should not have been sitting anywhere. He was in his mid-20s, heavy-built, wearing a jacket with the Steelmark logo on the sleeve. His left arm was braced against his side with the careful stillness of someone protecting broken or cracked ribs, and he had the particular gray pallor of someone who had been in pain long enough for it to become background noise. His name was Brandon Reese. She found this out at triage. He had been a student of Reeves for 8 months. He had been at the Thursday session. He had not been in the sparring demonstration. He had been in the open rolling session that Reeves ran in the hour before Nora arrived, which she had not witnessed. "How long has your side hurt?" she asked him during the initial assessment. "Since Thursday," he said. "I thought it was just bruised." "Show me where." He pointed. She palpated the area carefully, watching his face, reading the involuntary signals that bodies give before people decide whether they're going to understate or overstate their pain. His jaw tightened in a specific way at a specific location. "You need imaging," she said. "This could be a fracture." It was. The X-ray came back with 2 fractured ribs, one with a hairline crack that had an unfavorable vector relative to his lung. The attending, Dr. Mara Finch, ordered a CT and got on the phone with the on-call thoracic team. Nora sat with Brandon Reese while they waited for the CT order to process. He was trying not to breathe deeply, which was its own kind of answer. "How did this happen?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Sparring session." "Who were you paired with?" Another pause. "Officer Reeves." She kept her face professional. "Was it a supervised session?" "He ran it himself." "Were the matchings standardized? Similar weight? Similar experience level?" Brandon looked at her. He was 24 years old and in enough pain to make the social calculation difficult, but he made it anyway. "He put me against Garrett. Garrett's got 40 pounds on me in 2 years. I've had 8 months. He paused. "I told Reeves I wasn't feeling solid that night. He said it was good for me." Nora wrote in her notes, "I'm going to need to report this to hospital administration as a training-related injury," she said. "Standard protocol. It doesn't require your name to go anywhere specific initially, but I want to be transparent with you about the process." Brandon nodded slowly. "Will it go to the department?" "I don't know yet. That depends on how the report is processed and whether there are other reports to connect it to." She met his eyes. "Is this the first injury like this from one of his sessions?" Brandon looked at the curtain separating his bay from the adjacent one. "No," he said. "It's not." The report Nora filed went to hospital administration under the standard injury documentation protocol, coded as a recreational training injury with flagged circumstances indicating possible inadequate supervision. Dr. Finch co-signed it. The flag elevated it automatically to the department head for review. What Nora had not anticipated was how quickly the flag would move. By Thursday, exactly 1 week after the sparring session, she was called into the office of Dr. Emmett Salas, Hargrove Memorial's chief of emergency medicine. She had worked under Salas for 2 years. He was an exacting administrator and a good physician, and he had the specific manner of a man who distinguished carefully between problems that were his to solve and problems that belonged to someone else. This one, apparently, had become his. "Sit down, Voss." She sat. "The injury report you filed on Tuesday, Brandon Reese." "Yes." The flag triggered a cross-reference with our patient intake database for the last 18 months. Salas opened a folder. "We have identified 4 prior emergency admissions with coding consistent with training-related injuries from the same facility. 2 fractures, 1 soft tissue trauma with nerve involvement, 1 concussion." Nora was careful not to change her expression. "I wasn't aware of the prior admissions." "No, you wouldn't have been. You would have been in a different area of the department or off shift for all of them." Salas looked at the folder and then at her. "I also received a call this morning from a Captain Ren Hollis at the Caldwell Police Department, Internal Affairs Division." She let that land without reacting. Captain Hollis indicated that the department has received multiple informal complaints about Officer Callum Reeves' conduct as a defensive tactics instructor over the past 14 months. None of the complaints had risen to formal status because, and this is her language, the complainants were told the complaints were outside the department's scope when they occurred during non-departmental training. "But an injury report from a hospital is different," Nora said. "It creates a paper trail that the informal complaints did not," Salas confirmed. "Captain Hollis is requesting a meeting with our administration and our legal team regarding how the medical records can or cannot be accessed in connection with a potential internal review." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Am I in the meeting?" she asked. "You're being told about the meeting. Whether you're in it depends on how the legal parameters shake out." Salas closed the folder. "I want to be direct with you. You filed a correct and properly documented report. What you have done is procedurally sound. I'm also noting, in this conversation, that you have a personal history with this facility and this instructor that predates this report." "I attended the gym to support a patient," Nora said. "The observations I made there were not why I filed the report. I filed the report because a man came into this emergency department with fractured ribs from a training session run by an instructor who had been told he was not feeling solid that night." Salas looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not questioning the report, Voss. I know you're not. I'm telling you that as this process moves forward, the personal history is going to come up. Be prepared for it." "I know what I did and why I did it," she said. "I can explain both." He nodded. "All right. I'll keep you informed as far as I'm able." She left his office and went back to the emergency department floor and did her job for the next 6 hours with the concentrated attention of someone who understood that the work in front of her was the work that mattered and that everything else was process, and process took time. And the only thing to do while process took time was to be the most useful version of herself in the space she occupied. Reeves found out about the hospital report on Friday. She did not know this at first. She knew it only after Sarah texted her that evening with 3 words. "He's very angry." She texted back, "At the gym? Hasn't been to the gym." Larkin pulled his weekend sessions pending a conversation with the gym's insurer. Callum called Larkin 4 times today. "Is Larkin all right?" Larkin told him the sessions were suspended. Callum said he'd lawyer up. Larkin said, "Go ahead." Nora sat with that for a moment. Larkin, it turned out, had a spine. She had believed he probably did, based on the Saturday meeting, but belief was different from evidence, and she was glad to have the evidence. She set her phone down and went back to the meal she had been cooking, which was aggressively average pasta because she had been at the hospital for 10 hours, and nutritional complexity was beyond her current capacity. She ate it standing at the counter and looked out her kitchen window at the street below where the October evening was doing something cold and clear that reminded her of a different climate in a different part of her life. Her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, Caldwell area code but not a contact. She answered. "Is this Nora Voss?" A woman's voice. Measured, professional, with an authority in it that was not performed, the kind that came from using it regularly in situations where it mattered. Speaking. "My name is Captain Ren Hollis, Internal Affairs, Caldwell PD. I understand Dr. Salas may have mentioned my call to hospital administration." "He did. I'd like to meet with you directly if you're willing, not as part of any formal process at this stage. I want to be clear about that. This would be an informal conversation before we determine whether a formal process is warranted." Nora was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know what you observed at Steelmark Combat Academy over the course of your time there," Hollis said. "I want to know specifically about Officer Reeves' conduct with students, and I want to understand the timeline of what you reported and why." "I can do that," Nora said. "I also want to tell you something, off the record for now." A beat. "The complaints I mentioned to Dr. Salas's administration, the informal ones that went nowhere, 3 of them came from police recruits who trained under Reeves as part of a departmental program. They reported training conditions they considered unsafe. Their complaints were routed to a supervisor who had a personal relationship with Reeves and were filed as resolved without investigation." Nora stood very still. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're a nurse who filed a medical report on a training injury, and you're going to be positioned by some people as a civilian with a personal grievance who triggered a process because she lost an argument with an instructor. I want you to understand that what you filed connected to something that was already present before you walked into that gym." "I wasn't trying to be anyone's catalyst," Nora said. "Catalysts rarely are," Hollis said. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Do you know where the Caldwell PD administrative building on Ferris Street is?" "I'll find it." "Good. I'll leave your name at the front." The call ended. Nora set her phone down on the counter and looked at her pasta, which had gone cold. She put it in the microwave and stood with her arms crossed, looking at nothing specific, running through the shape of what Captain Hollis had told her. 3 police recruits. Complaints routed to a supervisor with a relationship to Reeves. Filed as resolved without investigation. This was larger than a bad instructor at a local gym. This had been operating inside the department itself, running on the assumption that the right relationships would absorb any friction. And it had worked, until a nurse with a patient who needed to rebuild confidence had walked into the wrong building on a Tuesday in October. The microwave beeped. She ate her pasta. She did not sleep especially well that night, which was honest. Sunday morning, 2 days before the Monday meeting, Nora was at the hospital by 6 for a shift that started at 6:30. She was in the process of reviewing overnight notes at the nursing station when Dina Tilly appeared at the emergency department entrance. Nora saw her face and was moving before she had consciously decided to move. Dina's expression was not the grief face or the emergency face. It was the face of someone who had been holding something together through the weekend and had reached the limit of what holding together looked like. "Is Marcus hurt?" Nora asked, reaching her. "No, he's home." Dina pressed her fingers against her forehead. "He's home and he's He's actually okay. That's not... She stopped, breathed. He went to the gym yesterday, on his own, without me driving him. He took the bus. Nora waited. And when he got there, there was a note on the door that the youth sessions were suspended pending review of instructor qualifications. And Marcus came home and he didn't fall apart. He just sat at the kitchen table and he said, "Mom, I think what they're doing is right. I think they need to make sure the people running it are good." And then he asked if I thought the gym would reopen. Dina's voice was controlled, but her eyes were not. He's 14. 6 weeks ago, he couldn't walk into a building without checking every exit. He took a bus across town by himself because he wanted to train. Nora did not have a clean response to that. She stood with it. "I just needed to tell you," Dina said. "I couldn't figure out how to say it in a text." "You didn't need a text," Nora said. "You needed to say it out loud." Dina nodded. She looked around the emergency department with the slightly disconnected gaze of someone remembering where they were. "You have to work." "In a few minutes. I have a few minutes." They stood in the waiting area together for a moment, not saying anything else, which was its own kind of thing. After Dina left, Nora went back to the nursing station and picked up the overnight notes and continued reviewing them. Her hand was steady. Her focus was what it needed to be. She did her work for the next hour with the particular quality of attention that the work deserved, all of it. She was charting at 11 when her personal phone buzzed with a number she did not recognize. Different area code this time, not Caldwell. She stepped into the break room before answering. "Voss?" The voice on the other end was male, professional, and carried a quality she had not heard in 3 years but recognized immediately. The flat efficiency of someone accustomed to being the most informed person in a room about the specific thing that mattered right now. "My name is Special Agent Theodore Marsh, CID. I have some questions about Officer Callum Reeves and a procurement contract connected to the Caldwell PD training division." The break room was quiet around her. "A procurement contract," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Specifically, a contract covering training equipment and facility services that has Reeves listed as a departmental liaison. I understand you have recent direct contact with the relevant facility and the personnel involved." She leaned against the break room counter. Her mind was doing what it had been trained to do, building the shape of information from limited data, identifying what she knew, what she did not know, and what the gap between those two things suggested. "How did you get my name?" she asked. "Captain Hollis, Internal Affairs, Caldwell PD. She indicated you would be meeting with her Monday. She also indicated you're someone we should talk to before that meeting happens." Nora looked at the break room clock. 11:14 on a Sunday morning. The thing she had walked into, the bad instructor, the frightened students, the gym on the edge of the warehouse district, had just grown a dimension she had not been tracking. "I'm on shift until 7 this evening," she said. "I can be available at 7:30. 7:30 works," Marsh said. We'll be in Caldwell by then." "We." She noted the plural. "All right," she said. She ended the call and stood in the break room for a moment longer than she needed to, hands flat on the counter, looking at the wall with the focus of someone who was reassembling a picture that had just acquired new edges. Then she went back to work, because there were patients who needed her, and the other thing would still be there at 7:30, and doing this job well was the only thing she had ever found that reliably kept the larger problems from swallowing the smaller necessary moments. At 4:30 that afternoon, her charge nurse pulled her aside with the particular expression of someone delivering information they are not sure is good news or bad news. "There's a man asking for you at the front desk," the charge nurse said. "He's not a patient. He said his name is Reeves." Nora took 11 seconds before she responded to her charge nurse. She counted them without meaning to, the way she sometimes counted things when she needed her face to stay neutral while her mind caught up with what she had just heard. 11 seconds was long enough to decide that going out to the front desk was the only option, because the alternative was sending a message she did not want to send, that she was hiding, or that she was afraid, neither of which was true. "Tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes," she said. She finished the medication documentation she had been working on, not because the documentation was urgent, but because leaving it half-finished would have bothered her, and she was not going to let Callum Reeves be the reason her charting was sloppy. Then she washed her hands, which she had already washed, because the habit was the habit. He was standing near the far end of the waiting room when she came through the double doors. He was not in uniform, Jeans, a dark jacket, no department insignia. He looked like a man who had made a deliberate choice about that, which told her something about the nature of this visit. He also looked like the man who had not slept well in several days, which told her something else. The waiting room had the Sunday afternoon quality of a place where time moves differently than it does in the rest of the world. A couple with a small child running a low fever, an elderly man with his arm in a sling, two teenage girls who were probably together but were on separate phones. Nobody was paying attention to Reeves. He had positioned himself away from the main seating cluster, which suggested he did not want an audience. That too told her something. She stopped at a distance that was conversational but not close. "Mr. Reeves, I know about the meeting Monday," he said. He kept his voice low. Not threatening low, controlled low. The voice of someone who had rehearsed an opening and was executing it. With Hollis. "All right, I want to know what you're planning to tell her." "I'm going to tell her what I observed," Nora said. "Same thing I've told anyone who asked." His jaw moved. "You have no idea what you've started. I filed a medical report on a training injury. What happened after that is a process I don't control." "You went to Larkin. You talked to my students." His voice stayed level, but the restraint in it was visible, the way a cable looks when weight is being added to it. "You built a case before you had a reason to build one." "I raised concerns about what I saw. I did that directly to you first, and you told me to go back to my hospital." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his face that was more complicated than anger. A recognition, maybe, or the beginning of one. It did not stay long. "I've spent 9 years building what I built at that gym. 9 years with the department. You walked in 6 weeks ago." "I know," she said. "Then you know this isn't small for me." "I know that too." He looked around the waiting room without meaning to, a reflexive check of the space. Old habit. She recognized it because she had the same one. The recognition did something involuntary to her assessment of him. Not sympathy, but a more complicated understanding of what she was looking at. A man who had built an identity out of being the toughest person in a room, who had let that identity become a method of operation, who had operated that method long enough that he genuinely could not see the damage it was doing, because the damage always happened to someone else. "Is there something specific you want from me?" she asked. "I wanted to know if you'd consider not going Monday," he said, "or going and limiting what you say to the medical report, not the gym observations." Nora stood with that for a moment. "No," she said. He nodded, once the nod of a man accepting an answer he had known was coming. "Then I need you to understand that what you say in that room is going to come back on me in ways that aren't just professional." "I understand that. My family—" He stopped, looked at the floor. "I have 2 kids." She did not say anything. "I'm not asking for your sympathy," he said, and the way he said it suggested he was aware of exactly how that sounded and did not know how else to say it. "Then what are you asking for?" He looked up. The restraint was gone from his face for just a second, and what was underneath it was something she had not expected. Not rage, but a kind of exhausted honesty that had probably not seen much air in years. "I don't know," he said. "I came here because I didn't know what else to do." The waiting room continued around them, indifferent. "Go home," Nora said. "Be with your kids this evening. Monday is Monday, and what happens there is about what you did in that gym, not about anything I decided." The process started because a 24-year-old came into this emergency department with 2 fractured ribs, and that's what I'm going to tell Captain Hollis. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked out through the main entrance. Nora watched the door close behind him. Then she went back to work. The Monday meeting was in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Caldwell PD Administrative Building, a deliberately neutral space, institutional without being punitive, the kind of room designed to make everyone present feel equally uncomfortable and therefore equally accountable. Captain Ren Hollis was not what Nora had constructed from her voice on the phone. The voice had suggested someone compact and precise. Hollis was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair, and a quality of absolute physical stillness that Nora associated with people who had spent considerable time in situations where unnecessary movement was a liability. Seated beside Hollis, Nora had not expected the city attorney's representative, a thin, careful man named Dougal Price, whose presence signaled that the department had already moved past the question of whether this was serious. Special Agent Theodore Marsh was present as well, which meant CID had moved faster than 7:30 Sunday evening. He was younger than his voice, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with the particular patience of a federal investigator who understood that the work was in the waiting. Salas from Hargrove Memorial was there, with the hospital's legal counsel beside him. Nora sat down and put her hands flat on the table in front of her. Hollis opened. This meeting is not a formal deposition. Nothing said here is testimony in any legal proceeding unless we establish that separately. What we are doing today is building a factual foundation that allows multiple agencies to understand whether they are looking at the same problem from different angles. She looked at each person in turn. Special Agent Marsh, do you want to establish the CID thread first? Marsh set a folder on the table. He did not open it immediately. 18 months ago, the Caldwell PD Training Division entered a service contract with Steelmark Combat Academy for facility use and supplementary defensive tactics instruction. Officer Reeves was the departmental liaison for that contract. Over the course of those 18 months, the contract was modified 3 times, each modification increasing the compensation to the facility. Standard Review flagged an anomaly in the 3rd modification. The rate increase was approved without the required secondary sign-off from divisional oversight. Price, the city attorney's representative, made a note. What we found when we pulled the full contract file, Marsh continued, was that the paperwork for the secondary sign-off exists. It's signed, but the signature belongs to a sergeant who has been on medical leave since 2 weeks before the modification date. He did not sign it. The room was quiet. Someone forged a supervisor's signature on a city contract, Hollis said, not as a question. That is what the document evidence currently suggests, Marsh said. Nora looked at the folder on the table. She was thinking about the gym on the edge of the warehouse district, and the student with 2 fractured ribs, and the 14-year-old who had learned to take a bus across town by himself. And she was thinking about how small those things had seemed when she first walked in, and how the radius of what was actually happening had kept expanding every time she thought she had found its edge. Ms. Voss, Hollis said, turning to her, I want to give you an opportunity to lay out your observations from the beginning. Take the time you need. She took it. She laid it out chronologically, without editorializing, the way she documented patient histories, specific dates, specific observations, specific statements she had heard, specific physical responses she had witnessed. She described Marcus Tilley without using his name, referencing him only as the patient whose mother had contacted her. She described Petra without the last name she had never learned. She described Brandon Reese's admission to the emergency department, the imaging results, the attending's assessment. She described the Thursday sparring session with the precision of someone who had trained in observation as a professional skill and applied it here. When she finished, Price looked up from his notes. You participated in a sparring session with Officer Reeves. Yes. Why? Because he challenged me in front of witnesses, and I assessed that declining would enable him to continue framing himself as the authority in that space without consequence. Getting on the mat was the fastest way to create a different frame. Hollis almost smiled. It was brief. And the outcome? I held my own. He did not win the round. Several people present saw that, including law enforcement personnel from his own network. Marsh leaned forward slightly. The contract modifications. Was there anything at the gym that suggested Reeves was operating with a financial interest in the facility beyond his instructor role? Nora thought carefully. I'm not in a position to speak to financial arrangements. What I can tell you is that Reeves's authority at that gym exceeded what his official role as a guest instructor would typically produce. He had operational control over session scheduling, student pairings, and equipment use. Coach Larkin, the owner, deferred to him in ways that seemed structural rather than incidental. As if Reeves had leverage, Hollis said. That's one interpretation. I don't know the nature of the relationship. The meeting ran another 90 minutes. By the end of it, Nora had signed a witness statement that covered her observational record. Marsh had indicated that CID's investigation into the contract irregularities would continue independently of Hollis's internal review of the conduct complaints. Hollis had indicated that Reeves would be placed on administrative leave pending the internal review, effective that afternoon. Nora drove back to Hargrove Memorial for a half shift starting at 1 o'clock. She changed into her scrubs in the locker room and thought for approximately 40 seconds about everything she had set in motion and whether she had done it right and whether right was the correct measure anyway. And then she put it down and went to work because there were patients. The administrative leave was public by Tuesday evening. In Caldwell's law enforcement community, administrative leave for a 9-year veteran with Reeves's profile was not the kind of news that stayed contained. By Wednesday, it had reached the local news desk. By Thursday morning, a reporter from the Caldwell Register had called Hargrove Memorial's public affairs office, asking for confirmation that a hospital nurse had filed the injury report that triggered the process. The public affairs office called Nora. "I have no comment for the press," she said. "I filed a standard medical report. That's procedural. It's not a story." "They're going to write one anyway," the public affairs officer said. "I know, I still don't have a comment." She hung up and went back to her patients. What she did not know, because Hollis had not yet told her, was that 3 of Reeves's former students had contacted the Internal Affairs Office in the 48 hours following the announcement of administrative leave. Not to support him, to file the formal complaints that had previously existed only as informal conversations. She found out about the students on Friday when Hollis called her. "The third complainant is a recruit from the Defensive Tactics Program," Hollis said. He says Reeves told him specifically that any training injuries should not be reported to the department medical office, that it would reflect poorly on the recruit's fitness assessment. Nora was in her car in the hospital parking garage. She had the engine running for the heat. Outside the concrete levels, Caldwell was doing something cold with the November sky. "He was coaching them to stay quiet," she said. "It appears so, systematically, over time." A pause. "The CID element is complicating the internal review. There's a question of jurisdiction that Price is working through. The short version is that the contract fraud, if that's what the forgery constitutes, is a city matter, while the conduct complaints are a departmental matter. And CID's interest is whether there's a federal angle through the Departmental Training Certification Program, which receives federal grant funding." "Federal grant funding," Nora said. "A facility receiving federal training grant funding through a departmental contract is held to different standards than a private gym. If Reeves was manipulating that contract for personal financial benefit, and the facility was accepting grant-funded payments under conditions that were not met, the injured students, the conduct issues, that's a potential misuse of federal funds." The parking garage was cold even with the engine running. She could see her breath when she exhaled. "How long does the investigation take?" she asked. "Longer than anyone wants," Hollis said. "But I want you to hear something from me directly before you hear it another way. Reeves retained an attorney yesterday. The attorney has sent a letter to hospital administration and to our office indicating that his client disputes the characterization of training conditions at the facility and intends to pursue a claim of defamation against individuals whose statements contributed to his administrative leave." The word landed with the flat weight of something she had prepared for without fully preparing for. "He's going after me specifically," Nora said. "The letter does not name you by name. It references the medical report and subsequent witness statement." Hollis's voice was level and informational. "Our office's legal team is reviewing it. Hargrove Memorial's counsel is aware." "Is there a basis for the claim?" "Our counsel's initial assessment is no. You filed a factually accurate medical report and gave a witness statement consistent with what multiple other witnesses corroborate. Defamation requires false statements made with knowledge of their falsity, but that is our counsel's assessment, not a guarantee of outcome." Nora sat in her car in the parking garage and looked at the concrete wall in front of her. "All right," she said. "I want to ask you directly," Hollis said. "Does this change anything about your willingness to remain a cooperative witness?" "No," Nora said. "Good." A brief pause that held something human in it. "For what it's worth, you did not cause this situation. You documented it. Those are different things." After the call ended, Nora sat in the car for another few minutes. She was running a clinical assessment on herself, which was a habit from the military, and which had the advantage of being honest in a way that self-reassurance was not. Hands steady, breathing regular. The specific unease in her chest was anxiety, not fear, and the distinction mattered. Anxiety was a response to uncertainty, and uncertainty was a condition of being alive. And she had operated in far more acute uncertainty than this and come out the other side functional. She drove home. She ate. Slept 6 hours, which was adequate. She went to work. The defamation letter reached Hargrove Memorial's legal counsel on Friday. By Monday of the following week, the hospital's response had been drafted. By Wednesday, Nora had met with the hospital's attorney, a woman named Blair Ott, who had the manner of someone who found legal strategy genuinely enjoyable in the way other people found puzzles enjoyable. "They're hoping the letter alone is enough," Ott said. "If you get nervous, if the hospital pressures you to walk back the witness statement, if Hollis's office decides the political cost is too high, the complaint loses its most credible corroborating witness without Reeves ever having to go to trial. And if none of that happens, then they have a problem. Because the medical documentation is airtight, the witness corroboration is substantial, and the internal affairs complaints from 3 additional people have nothing to do with you. Their best case falls apart under scrutiny." Nora thought about Brandon Reese, pressing his hand against his fractured ribs, insisting he was fine. "The injured students, are they being contacted?" "Hollis's office has been in touch with the prior admissions we identified through the database cross-reference. 3 of the 4 have been willing to speak to investigators." "And the 4th? Ott looked at her notepad. "He's hesitant. He's still employed with the city. Different department, not PD, but he's concerned about professional exposure. Can I talk to him?" Ott paused. "That's outside the legal process. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not asking as a legal strategy. I'm asking because he came into my emergency department with nerve damage in his shoulder, and he told me at the time that he was fine, and he said that because someone had convinced him that reporting it was a worse outcome than living with it." Ott looked at her for a long moment. "I'll see if Hollis can approach him again with the updated context about the investigation. That's the appropriate channel." "All right," Nora said. She walked out of the attorney's office and into a gray November afternoon and drove back to Hargrove Memorial, where there was a waiting room full of people who were not fine and who had come to a place where someone would tell them the truth about it. The investigation moved through November with the grinding patience of institutional process. Nora worked her shifts. She responded to legal correspondence through OTT. She attended one further meeting with Marsh and a second CID agent whose name was Caldwell, which Marsh noted with a brief dry observation about coincidences. Regarding the specific contract documentation, Marcus Tilley, she learned through Dina, had been accepted into Steel Mark's youth competition program, which Larkin had quietly reopened under Sarah's full operational control after Reeves' administrative leave removed the constraint that had been preventing the restructure. He was training 3 times a week. He had competed in 1 internal skills assessment and finished in the middle of his age group, which Dina described with the careful understatement of a mother trying not to jinx something good. Nora texted back a single thumbs up, which was the correct response. She was in the break room on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of November when Sarah called. Not texted. Called, which meant something was immediate. "Callum was at the gym today," Sarah said. "He didn't come inside. He sat in his car in the parking lot for 40 minutes. Several students saw him." "Did he approach anyone?" "No, he left when Larkin came out." A pause. "The thing is, one of the youth students saw him and recognized him. Not Marcus. One of the girls. She's been here 4 months. She got upset. Her parents are talking about pulling her from the program." "Is she all right?" "She's scared. She's 11. Nora was quiet for a moment. "Does Hollis know about the parking lot incident?" "Larkin called it in after. Hollis's office said they'd note it." "Note it," Nora said, the words flat. "I know." Sarah's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been managing a difficult environment for weeks on top of teaching. "He's not doing anything technically actionable, Nora. He's just sitting there, making sure people see him." Nora understood what that was. She had seen it used before, in different contexts, against different people. It was a pressure application, not threat, not action, just presence. Just the reminder of what he was and what he was capable of, deployed against people who were already uncertain. "I'll make a call," Nora said. She called Hollis directly. She described the parking lot incident with clinical specificity, duration, witness ages, behavioral response of the 11-year-old student, Larkin's decision to come outside. She used the word intimidation once and then did not use it again because she did not need to. Hollis listened. "I'll contact his attorney today. It won't be a formal order yet, but the attorney will communicate the department's position clearly. Clearly enough that he stops sitting in parking lots where children can see him? That's the intent." It appeared to work. The parking lot incident did not repeat. But the following week brought something worse. The Caldwell Register ran a story. It was not the story Nora had expected. She had anticipated something about the administrative leave, about the internal review, the standard institutional accountability narrative. What the register ran instead had clearly been shaped by Reeves' attorney's communications. It framed the story as a veteran police officer under investigation based on complaints originating with an outside civilian who had inserted herself into a training environment and had her own confrontational history with the officer in question. It named her. Not prominently, not as the central figure, but her name was in the third paragraph with the words, "emergency nurse and disputed altercation" in the same sentence. Her photograph was not in the piece, but a search for her name would now return a local news article connecting her to an ongoing law enforcement investigation. OTT called within an hour of the article going live. Do not speak to any media. Do not post anything. Do not respond to anything you see online about this. I wasn't going to. I know you weren't. I'm saying it anyway. A pause. The good news is that the article is careful. It doesn't say anything technically false. The bad news is that it's framed in a way that is designed to precede a civil filing. He's actually going to sue. His attorney filed this afternoon, Ott said. Defamation. Against you personally, and against Hargrove Memorial as the institution whose reporting process your medical documentation initiated. Nora sat with that for a full 10 seconds. She was in the break room again. The break room at Hargrove Memorial had a small window that looked out on the hospital's interior courtyard, and through it she could see a section of the garden area that the hospital maintained for patients in longer-term recovery. A few benches, some late autumn plantings that had mostly gone to seed, a small water feature that was turned off for the winter. What does this do to the internal affairs review? She asked. Nothing officially. Hollis's process is independent of any civil action. But practically, it creates noise. It gives people a reason to describe the situation as complicated. Complicated situations take longer to resolve, and time is a resource that favors the party who is trying to outlast a process rather than complete one. Nora was quiet. Voss, Ott said. Are you all right? I'm thinking. Think out loud if it helps. She looked at the courtyard, at the turned-off water feature and the gone-to-seed plantings, and the empty benches. He's not going to win the lawsuit, she said. You already told me the basis is weak. He's using it to create enough friction that people start calculating whether cooperating with the investigation costs more than it's worth. That's an accurate read. Which means the people most at risk of making that calculation are the 3 students who already filed with Hollis. If one of them walks back their statement because they're afraid of being pulled into a civil action, then the internal affairs case gets significantly harder to sustain, Ott said. Nora took a breath. She had been in this position before, in a different theater, with different stakes and different weapons. The principle was the same. When you could not attack the evidence directly, you attacked the witnesses. You made the cost of standing up exceed the cost of standing down, and you did it incrementally, and you waited. She had also learned, in that different theater, that the way to defeat that strategy was not to outmaneuver it. It was to remove the calculation entirely by making the evidence so complete that the witnesses became redundant. The 4th student, she said, the one who hasn't spoken to investigators yet. Hollis's office approached him again last week, Ott said. He's still hesitant. His nerve damage. Is it documented anywhere? Not in any way that's been entered into this investigation. It's documented in our emergency department records, Nora said. I treated him. The records exist. That documentation does not require his participation to be part of this record. A pause. Nora, patient records are subject to legal process including subpoena in connection with a government investigation. Agent Marsh's investigation has federal jurisdiction. I'm not releasing records unilaterally. I'm pointing out that the documentation pathway exists without requiring the patient to take on the personal risk of stepping forward. Ott was quiet for a moment. That is technically accurate. Can you talk to Marsh today? I'll call him this afternoon. Nora ended the call and sat in the break room for another minute. The courtyard outside the window was very still. The gone-to-seed plantings were doing something in the low November light that was almost interesting if you had the attention for it. She did not quite have the attention for it. She went back to work. What she did not know, as she walked back onto the floor, was that at that exact moment, 40 minutes across Caldwell, Special Agent Marsh was sitting in a federal building with a financial forensic analyst and looking at a document that had arrived that morning from a city contractor's records request. The document showed a secondary account connected to the Steelmark facility's contract receipts, an account that was not in the gym's registered business name. The account was in Callum Reeves's name, and the deposits had been running for 14 months. The account had 14 months of deposits. Marsh spent the afternoon with the financial forensic analyst, a meticulous woman named Petra Solano, who approached numbers the way a surgeon approached tissue, with the understanding that everything she found had been alive once and was telling her how it died. The account was registered to Callum Reeves personally, not to any business entity, not to a spouse, not to a trust. It received wire transfers on the 15th of each month from a shell account connected to a facilities management company that existed on paper as a registered LLC in Oregon but had no employees, no physical address beyond a registered agent's mail drop in Portland, and no business activity that Solano could identify beyond receiving and forwarding money. The LLC had been registered 4 months before the first Steelmark contract modification. He set up the structure first, Solano said, pointing to the timeline on her screen. Then he modified the contract. Then the money started moving. She pulled up another document. The LLC's registered agent is a paralegal service that handles incorporation for small businesses, standard stuff. But the LLC itself lists one manager of record. She turned the screen toward Marsh. The manager of record was not Reeves. It was a man named Victor Ames, a name Marsh did not immediately recognize. He ran it through the department database and came back with a record. Victor Ames, 41 years old, prior employment with the Caldwell City Procurement Office. Resigned 14 months ago. No criminal record. 14 months ago was when the LLC was registered. Marsh looked at the timeline for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Hollis. "We have a second subject," he said. "What's Nora learned about Victor Ames on a Wednesday morning, not from Marsh or Hollis, but from Blair Ott, who had been copied on a legal notification from the U.S. Attorney's Office indicating that the investigation had expanded in scope and that Hargrove Memorial's cooperation would continue to be required in a federal capacity. The phrase federal capacity in a legal notification carried a different weight than the same words in conversation. OTT explained what it meant practically. The civil defamation suit Reeves had filed was now in serious jeopardy because attorneys who were watching a federal fraud investigation expand around their client tended to reassess the wisdom of simultaneously pursuing civil litigation that would generate additional discovery. "His attorney called me this morning," Ott said. "They want to discuss the civil suit." Discuss meaning what? Meaning they want to know if there's a pathway to withdrawal that doesn't look like collapse. Nora was quiet. "Is there?" "Not one that protects Reeves meaningfully. The filing is on public record. Withdrawing it doesn't erase it. But his attorney is in a difficult position. The federal investigation changes the risk calculation for everything." Ott paused. "I told them I'd consult with my client." "What do you recommend?" "I recommend letting them figure out their own exit without our assistance. We don't owe them a graceful retreat." "All right," Nora said. She went back to her shift and did not think about Victor Ames or the LLC or the withdrawal conversation for the next 4 hours, which was what the shift required of her and what she gave it. What she did not know was that Reeves had spent the 48 hours following the federal expansion notification doing something that Marsh had not anticipated and that Hollis had specifically worried might happen. He had been talking, not to his attorney, not to the department, not to anyone in the official structure of what was closing around him. He had been talking to the students who had filed complaints with Hollis, specifically to 2 of the 3, both of whom had trained with him for years, and who had a relationship with him that predated the conduct complaints by a significant margin. The first student, Garrett, had known Reeves since the early departmental training programs. He had filed his complaint in the wave following the administrative leave, when the process had seemed both safe and necessary. Now, with a federal investigation in the news and Reeves' attorney sending letters, and the situation looking less like institutional accountability and more like the kind of legal machinery that ground everyone in its vicinity, Garrett was having second thoughts that he was not fully articulating, but that his body language communicated clearly to the investigator who met with him on Tuesday. The second student had already contacted Hollis's office to ask what withdrawing a complaint would involve. Hollis called Nora on Wednesday afternoon, after Ott's call, but before the end of Nora's shift. 2 of the 3 complainants are wavering, she said, without framing it as anything other than what it was. Reeves has been in contact with them, We can't prove he told them to withdraw. The conversations were private, but the timing is not coincidental. Is that witness tampering? Nora asked. Potentially. We're looking at it. But proving what was said in private conversations between people who have a long personal history is difficult. A pause. The third complainant, the police recruit, has not wavered. He has also, as of this morning, agreed to go on record formally. Good. It's good, Hollis agreed with the qualified tone of someone for whom good news in a complicated situation was always partial. But I want to be transparent with you. If 2 of the 3 conduct complaints are withdrawn, the internal affairs case becomes harder to sustain as a standalone matter. It would likely merge into the federal investigation and be resolved in that context, which takes longer and has different outcomes. Nora sat with the architecture of what Hollis was describing. Reeves had spent 9 years building a network of relationships inside the department, the gym, the city contracting structure. That network was not going to dissolve because an investigation had opened. It was going to be used as pressure, as connection, as the slow erosion of the people who had agreed to speak. The 4th student, Nora said, the one with the nerve damage, still hasn't agreed to speak directly, but Marsh's team has subpoenaed his medical records from your emergency department. The documentation is in the federal record. Is it enough? It corroborates the pattern. It's not a personal account which carries different weight with a jury, but it establishes the physical reality of what was happening in that training environment independent of anyone's memory of events. Hollis was quiet for a moment. Ms. Voss, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. When you first walked into Steelmark, what did you think was going to happen? Nora thought about the Tuesday evening in October, the smell of the gym, Marcus standing at the edge of the youth group with his arms crossed. I thought I'd be there a few weeks and the kid I was supporting would stabilize and I'd go back to my regular routine. And instead the instructor told me to go back to my hospital and I couldn't make myself do that. Hollis made a sound that might have been a short laugh. For what it's worth, the fact that you couldn't make yourself do that is the reason we have subpoenable medical records and a federal investigation and a financial forensic analyst who has not slept a full night in 2 weeks. I'll try to feel good about her sleep deprivation, Nora said. This time Hollis did laugh, brief and real. Marsh arrested Victor Ames on a Friday morning in late November. The arrest was not dramatic in the way of television arrests. Ames was taken into custody at his current employer, a small logistics company in Caldwell's business district, with 2 agents and the relevant paperwork and no drawn weapons. He was cooperative in the physical sense. He did not resist, did not run, but he said nothing. He had a defense attorney retained within 3 hours, which suggested he had been preparing for this possibility for some time. Nora learned about the arrest through the Caldwell Register's digital notification system, which she had set up months ago for breaking local news, and which now felt like a significant life choice. She was in the hospital cafeteria on her lunch break, looking at her phone, when the notification appeared. She texted Ott a single question mark. Ott responded 4 minutes later. Yes, confirmed. This changes things significantly for Reeves. The mechanism of that change became clearer over the following week. Ames, faced with federal fraud charges that carried a substantially different sentencing framework than whatever cooperation might produce, made a decision that defense attorneys sometimes described as pragmatic, and that prosecutors described in terms that were considerably less flattering. He agreed to speak to federal investigators. What he told them, according to the summary Marsh shared with Hollis and that Hollis shared with Nora in their Thursday call, was detailed and specific and covered a period of time that extended further back than anyone had tracked. The arrangement between Reeves and Ames had begun not with the Steelmark contract, but with a prior contract at a different facility that no longer operated. Reeves had identified the procurement process as a vulnerability 2 years before the Steelmark contract existed. Ames, then still employed in the city procurement office, had been the connection point, a man with access to the approval process and a financial situation that made him receptive to an offer that Reeves had made over drinks at a departmental function. The structure they built was simple. Ames approved contract modifications. The modifications inflated the service fees. A portion of the inflated fees moved through the LLC to Reeves's personal account. Ames received a separate cut through a different mechanism, overpayment on a consulting arrangement that the LLC had with a second shell entity, which Solano had found 3 days after finding the first one. 2 years, Nora said. He was doing this for 2 years before Steelmark. At minimum, Hollis said. Ames is providing documentation. We're still working through the full scope. How much money? Across both facilities and the full period Ames is describing, the preliminary estimate is somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000. The cafeteria around her continued its lunch hour existence, indifferent to the numbers she was hearing. A food service worker was restocking the salad bar. 2 residents were having a conversation about a patient in terms clinical enough to be decipherable only to other medical professionals. The coffee she had bought 40 minutes ago was cold. What happens to the defamation suit? She asked. His attorney filed a notice of voluntary withdrawal this morning, Hollis said, before the Register ran the Ames arrest story. 45 minutes before, according to the timestamps OTT later showed her. Reeves' attorney had watched the investigation reach Ames and made a calculation, and the calculation had taken 45 minutes. The week following Ames' arrest had the specific quality of a situation that had reached its structural turning point but had not yet completed its motion. The moment after a tree cracks but before it falls, when the direction is certain and the timing is not. Reeves had not been charged yet. The federal investigation required the documentation of the full scope before charges were filed, and Ames's cooperation was producing more documentation than expected, which extended the timeline. Reeves remained on administrative leave. His attorney was no longer returning calls from the Register. His presence in the departmental building had become the kind of absence that was itself informative. People who had previously navigated around him were now navigating around the space where he had been. Nora went about her shifts. She decompressed the way she had learned to decompress in her military years. Physical routine, adequate sleep, the specific discipline of not carrying the work. Past the point where carrying it was productive. She ran 3 mornings a week on the trails above the Caldwell Reservoir, where the November air was cold enough to require actual effort to breathe, and where the only sound was the trail under her feet. She called Holt on a Saturday, which he answered on the first ring. "You were right about the second problem," she said. "Usually am," he said without satisfaction. "How bad was it?" "Complicated. Getting less so." She paused. "There was a civil suit." "Past tense?" "Past tense." "And the main thing?" "Still moving. Federal timeline." Holt was quiet for a moment. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, and it was mostly true, which was as honest as she was able to be with most things. "That's not what I asked." She ran another 50 meters before answering. "I'm tired, the kind of tired that's not about sleep." "Yeah," he said. "I know that tired. It'll pass." "It will," he agreed. "You have anyone there, people, I mean, not the investigation." She thought about Dina Tilley's face in the emergency department waiting room. About Sarah's texts that continued to arrive regularly, not always about the investigation, sometimes just about the gym, about how the youth program was developing, about something a student had done that was worth noting. About Larkin, who had called once to say nothing official, only that he was glad she had come to his gym that Tuesday and that he was sorry it had taken so long to act on what he already knew. "Some," she said. "Good," Holt said. "That matters more than the rest of it." She ran the rest of the trail without talking, and Holt stayed on the line because he understood that sometimes that was enough. Marcus competed in his first external youth tournament on a Saturday in the first week of December. Nora went. She had not been invited in a formal way. Dina had simply texted her the details with the same compressed certainty with which she had texted about the first class, operating on the assumption that Nora would want to know. The assumption was correct. The tournament was held at a regional sports facility 40 minutes outside Caldwell, a large open floor with multiple competition areas running simultaneously, the distinctive cacophony of a youth competition where every match had its own small audience of parents and coaches and siblings doing separate things with their faces depending on how the match was going. Marcus competed in the 14 to 15 intermediate bracket. He had drawn a kid from a gym in Medford who had 6 months more experience and 3 inches of reach on him. Nora watched the match from the parent section. Marcus was nervous. It was visible in his jaw, in the way he kept rolling his right shoulder before the match started, the physical displacement of anxiety. He had the startle response still. It was less acute than it had been. He lost the match. Not badly. It went the full time and the decision was split. But he lost it on points, The Medford kid's reach advantage materializing in the last 40 seconds in a way that Marcus couldn't close. He shook hands, removed his headgear, walked off the mat. Nora watched him find Sarah at the edge of the competition area. She watched Sarah say something brief and direct, the way good coaches do when someone has just lost and does not need a speech about it. She watched Marcus nod. Then he looked up and found Nora in the parent section because he had known she was there the way teenagers know things about adults who have been paying attention to them. He gave her a nod. She gave him one back. It was not a victory. It was something more durable than a victory. It was a 14-year-old who had spent the aftermath of a traumatic event learning to walk into rooms where he was uncertain of the outcome, and who had just done it in front of a crowd and come out the other side still standing. She drove back to Caldwell afterward and was halfway home when her phone rang through the car's audio system. Ott's number. She answered. "Marsh called me 20 minutes ago," Ott said, and her voice had the specific quality it carried when the information she was delivering was larger than the container of professional composure. "He wants a meeting Monday morning. He indicated it's regarding the status of the investigation and potential charges." "Reeves?" "Both Reeves and a third subject," Ott said. Nora kept her hand steady on the wheel. "Who's the third?" "A sergeant named Dale Pruitt," Ott said. "He was Reeves's direct supervisor in the Defensive Tactics Division. He's the one who approved the early complaints as resolved without investigation." A pause. "He was also, according to the documentation Ames provided, the person who forged the sign-off that made the contract modification possible. Not Reeves, Pruitt." The road ahead was gray and straight in the December afternoon, the kind of road that demanded nothing particular of the driver. "Reeves didn't forge the document himself," Nora said slowly. "No, Ames testified that Pruitt handled the forgery. Reeves provided the financial structure. Pruitt provided the institutional access and cover. They needed each other. And Pruitt suppressed the complaints to protect the contract. And to protect Reeves, which was the same as protecting himself," Ott said. "If Reeves went down, the contract irregularities would be investigated, which would lead back to the forged signature, which would lead back to Pruitt." Nora drove. "Monday morning," she said. 8 o'clock, Ott confirmed. She arrived home, unlocked her apartment, set her bag down by the door. The topographical map on her wall caught the afternoon light at the angle it always caught it this time of year, turning the contour lines into something that looked almost three-dimensional for about 20 minutes before the light shifted. She looked at it for a moment. Then she changed out of her good clothes and into the ones she ran in, and she went back outside because she needed to move, and movement was how she processed things that were too large to sit still with. Monday's meeting was in a federal building, not the Caldwell PD administrative offices. That distinction mattered in a way that was structural rather than symbolic. It meant the lead agency had shifted, that what had begun as an internal affairs matter and a hospital injury report had completed its migration into a federal proceeding. Marsh ran the meeting. Hollis was present but seated to the side rather than at the head of the table, which was also a structural signal. Ott sat beside Nora. Across from them was a federal prosecutor named Diane Cho, whose manner suggested she had not come to this meeting to exchange pleasantries. "We will be filing charges this week," Marsh began. "The targets are Officer Callum Reeves, Sergeant Dale Pruitt, and Victor Ames, who has agreed to plead guilty in exchange for cooperation and will be sentenced separately. The charges cover federal program fraud, misuse of federal grant funding, conspiracy to defraud, and in the case of Sergeant Pruitt, document falsification in connection with a government contract." Nora looked at the table in front of her. "There are additional charges related to the conduct complaints," Hollis added. "In coordination with the federal matter, the department is pursuing departmental charges against Reeves for conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority in a training capacity, and directing trainees to suppress injury reporting. These are separate from the federal charges and will be adjudicated through the departmental process, but the timing will align. The civil suit withdrawal," Ott said. "Noted in the federal record," Cho said. "It does not constitute cooperation. It is simply a dismissed proceeding." Nora watched the prosecutor's face. Cho had the quality of someone for whom this work was neither personal nor impersonal. It was precise. The charges existed because the evidence supported them. The evidence existed because a series of documented events had produced a paper record that could not be argued away. The paper record included emergency department admission forms and imaging results and nursing notes, and a witness statement given in a conference room with institutional fluorescent lighting and a city attorney's representative taking notes. "Will you need Ms. Voss to testify?" Ott asked. "Possibly at trial," Cho said. "For the federal proceeding, the documentary record is the primary evidentiary foundation. The witness statement corroborates the physical evidence pattern. Whether we need live testimony depends on how the defense responds to the charges." "And the two conduct complainants who withdrew their statements?" Nora asked. "The third complainant's statement stands," Hollis said. "The medical records from your facility, which were subpoenaed and processed through legal channels, document 4 separate training injuries that corroborate the pattern the remaining complainant describes. Withdrawal of 2 statements does not eliminate the evidentiary record." Nora heard that and understood what it meant in terms of what Reeves had tried to do and what it had cost him. He had spent the weeks between his administrative leave and Ames' arrest working his relationships, applying pressure, trying to erode the human elements of the case against him. What he had not accounted for was that the medical record she had filed was not a human element. It was a document. And documents did not take calls from someone they had known for 9 years and wonder if maybe they had been too hasty. The meeting ended 40 minutes after it began. Nora walked out into the December street and stood on the sidewalk for a moment while Ott finished a call beside her. The morning was cold and clear, and the downtown Caldwell Street had the functional business of a Monday. People moving between buildings with the purposeful posture of people who had somewhere to be. "The charges file Thursday," Ott said, ending her call. "The register will have it within the hour after that. This is going to be public in a way that Thursday at the gym was not." "I know." "Are you prepared for that?" Nora looked at the street, at the ordinary Monday morning motion of a city that did not yet know what was about to become part of its public record. "I was prepared for it to be necessary," she said. "Whether I'm prepared for what it looks like is a different question." "That's an honest answer," Ott said. "It's the only kind I have." They stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Then Ott flagged a car and headed back to her office, and Nora headed to the hospital parking structure 3 blocks away where her car was, and she walked those 3 blocks thinking about Thursday. Not the Thursday of the sparring session, not the Thursday of the parking lot incident. The Thursday of the filing, which was 3 days away, and which would put Callum Reeves' name and Dale Pruitt's name and Victor Ames's name into the federal system in a way that no relationship and no private conversation and no letter from an attorney could address, because the mechanism of it was now beyond any of their reach. She was 2 blocks from the parking structure when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she did not have saved, which was unusual because she was careful about who had her number. The text said, "You should know what you actually did. It wasn't just the contract. There are 3 other cities. Ames has documentation on all of them. I thought someone should tell you the size of what you walked into." She stopped on the sidewalk and read the text twice. Then she looked at the number. Caldwell area code. Not a contact, not any number she recognized. She typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in under a minute. "Brandon Reese. You treated my ribs. I'm the one who wouldn't testify. I'm sorry it took me this long." She stood on the cold December sidewalk and read the message. 3 other cities. She looked up from her phone at the street around her, at the ordinary Monday morning that was not ordinary, and thought about Marsh's face in the meeting room when he had said both targets and then corrected it to 3 targets, and whether the correction had been information management or something else, and what it meant that a man who had been too afraid to testify for months had just sent her a text from a number she did not have, telling her that what she thought she had found was the surface of something she had not yet measured. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marsh. "Miss Voss, are you still in the area? There's something we need to discuss before the charges file Thursday. Something that wasn't in this morning's meeting." She called Marsh back before she reached the parking structure. He answered on the first ring. "How quickly can you get back here?" 10 minutes, she said. "What wasn't in the meeting?" "I'd rather show you the documents in person." "Marsh." A pause. "The Ames cooperation has been more productive than we anticipated when we briefed you this morning. Significantly more productive. The 3 cities Brandon Reese mentioned. He reached out to you?" "Text, just now." "He reached out to us last night," Marsh said. "He gave us 4 hours of recorded statement. We've been working through it since midnight." Another pause, shorter. "Come back to the building. There's a conference room on the 2nd floor. I'll leave your name." She turned around on the sidewalk and walked back the way she had come, The second-floor conference room was smaller than the morning's meeting room and felt less formal for it. A working space rather than a presentation space, with a laptop open on the table and printed documents in organized stacks rather than folders. Marsh was there with Solano, the financial forensic analyst, who had the particular brightness in her eyes of someone running on insufficient sleep and genuine professional momentum. There was no one else in the room. Marsh closed the door and turned to face her. "Sit down." She sat. The three cities Brandon Reese referenced are Portland, Eugene, and Salem. In each city, there is or was a martial arts or defensive tactics training facility with a municipal contract for law enforcement training services. In each case, the contract was administered through a departmental liaison. In two of the three cases, the liaison was someone with a direct professional relationship to Reeves through the state law enforcement training certification network. Nora looked at the documents on the table. He was running the same structure in other cities. Ames was the architect. Reeves was the model. Marsh sat down across from her. What Ames built in Caldwell worked well enough that he replicated the structure elsewhere with other facilitators. Different people, same mechanism. A departmental insider with procurement access. A facility with a municipal contract, modified rates, money moving through LLCs that existed for nothing else. "How much total?" Solano answered, looking at her laptop. "Across all four cities, the current estimate is between $2.1 and $2.6 million over a period of approximately 3 years. The number sat in the room with them. "Reeves knew about the other cities?" Nora asked. "He knew about Portland," Marsh said. "That's where the structure was piloted. He was present for the initial arrangement. Whether he has direct knowledge of Eugene and Salem is still being established, but his participation in the Portland setup makes him a conspirator in the broader scheme regardless of how much he knew about its expansion." Nora looked at the stacks of documents. 14 months of watching a gym, filing a medical report, sitting in conference rooms and parking garages and break rooms. What she had seen at Steelmark had been the piece of a structure that she could see, the local, visible, human-scale damage of it. The injured students, the frightened children, the instructor who mistook dominance for authority. The structure beneath it had been running for 3 years across 4 cities, draining public money intended for law enforcement training into a network of shell accounts and personal deposits, while the people the training was supposed to protect, recruits, officers, the communities those officers served, received something that was fraudulent in its financial foundation and negligent in its execution. "Why are you telling me this before the charges file?" she asked. Marsh looked at her steadily. "Because you are the reason any of this is in front of us. Not as flattery, as a factual statement about the evidentiary chain. The injury report you filed created the cross-reference. The cross-reference connected to Hollis's informal complaints. The informal complaints connected to the contract irregularities. The contract irregularities connected to Ames. Ames connected to 3 other cities and a structure that has been operating since before you walked into Steelmark." He paused. "You should know the full scope of what that report produced." She was quiet for a moment. "Brandon Reese," she said, "he gave you 4 hours of statement." "He did. He was present for conversations between Reeves and the Portland facilitator that he overheard during training sessions he attended with Reeves as a training partner. He did not understand at the time what he was hearing. After the investigation became public, he did." "Is he protected?" "He has a cooperation agreement. His testimony, combined with Ames's documentation, is substantial." Marsh looked at his own hands for a moment, a gesture that was almost uncharacteristic of him. "He asked us to tell you something." "What?" "He said you were the first person who treated him like his injury mattered. Not as evidence, not as a complaint. He said you sat with him while he waited for imaging and you asked him how long it had hurt, and nobody before that had asked him that question in a way that expected an honest answer." The conference room was very quiet. "He was 24 years old and in pain," she said. "That's my job." "I know," Marsh said. "I'm telling you anyway." "Awesome." The charges filed on Thursday, as scheduled. Federal charges against Callum Reeves, Dale Pruitt, and Victor Ames. The Portland facilitator, a man named Gordon Steck, who ran a facility called Iron Gate Tactical, was charged separately in the District of Oregon. 2 additional subjects in Eugene and Salem were identified as persons of interest, with charges anticipated pending further investigation. The Caldwell Register ran the story as its lead for 3 consecutive days. The first day covered the charges themselves. The second day covered the scope: 4 cities, multiple facilitators, the $2-point-something million figure that Solano's office had settled on as a conservative estimate. The third day ran a timeline of the events that had led to the investigation's origin, which included a factual account of a hospital injury report filed by an emergency nurse at Hargrove Memorial, the cross-reference of prior admissions, and the subsequent internal affairs contact. The article named her, this time without the disputed altercation framing, this time as the person whose documentation had initiated the chain. She read it on her phone in the hospital break room during a 15-minute gap between patients, then set her phone face down on the table and thought about whether she felt anything specific about being named in a news article as the origin point of a federal investigation. What she felt mostly was tired in a way that was beginning to lift, which was different from the tired that had been accumulating since October. The lifting kind of tired was the honest aftermath of something that had required sustained effort, and there was something almost comfortable about it, the way the ache in a muscle that has done real work is different from the ache of tension that hasn't resolved. Her charge nurse knocked on the break room door frame. "Room 4 is asking for you specifically, the sprained ankle from this morning." "Coming," Nora said, and put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. Callum Reeves entered a plea of not guilty. Dale Pruitt entered a plea of not guilty. Victor Ames, as agreed, entered a plea of guilty on 2 counts of federal program fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. His cooperation agreement recommended a sentencing range that his attorney described to the Register as fair given the circumstances, which was attorney language for, he is going to spend time in federal custody, and this was the best available outcome. Reeves's departmental charges moved through the separate internal process. The third conduct complainant, the police recruit, gave his formal statement in January. His account was detailed and specific and covered 18 months of training sessions in which Reeves had systematically exceeded safe training parameters, suppressed injury reporting, and cultivated the institutional protection of a supervisor who had financial reasons to keep the complaints quiet. Pruitt's role in suppressing the complaints became its own count in the federal conspiracy charge, because the suppression had been a material act in protecting the contract fraud. The complaints were not merely disciplinary matters that had been handled poorly. They were evidence that had been deliberately buried to protect a financial scheme. That distinction changed both the charge and the likely outcome. The departmental hearings were not public in the way the federal proceedings were, but their conclusions were. Reeves was terminated from the Caldwell Police Department in February. His defensive tactics certification was revoked by the State Law Enforcement Standards Board. Pruitt resigned 3 days before his own termination hearing and was subsequently indicted on the federal conspiracy charge regardless of the resignation, because the federal process did not require his continued employment as a condition of prosecution. Nora learned about the terminations through Hollis, who called on a Thursday evening. Thursdays had acquired a specific quality over the course of the preceding months, with the compressed efficiency of someone delivering a resolution. "Reeves is terminated effective today," Hollis said. "Pruitt's resignation is accepted and the federal charges stand. I wanted you to hear it directly." "Thank you," Nora said. "I want to say something else," Hollis said, and her voice shifted slightly in the way of someone stepping out from behind a professional register into something adjacent. "I've been in internal affairs for 11 years. I have seen a lot of situations where the person who brought the first piece of information was ground up by the process before the process produced anything. You weren't. I don't entirely know why. It's partly the documentation, partly the federal angle, partly the fact that you were difficult to discredit because you weren't operating from anger or grievance." A pause. "You were just correct. That matters more than people give it credit for." Nora stood in her kitchen with the same cold December light coming through the same window where it always came through. "Is the steel mark situation resolved from your end?" "Larkin has cooperated fully with the investigation. The gym's contracts have been restructured. There's no evidence Larkin had knowledge of the financial arrangement. He was being used as a vehicle, not a partner." Hollis paused. "The gym is still operating. Youth program and adult classes. Sarah Nakamura is running the full curriculum now. I understand enrollment is up." Nora said nothing for a moment. "Good," she said. The federal trials were scheduled for late spring. The plea arrangement shifted the picture over the weeks following the initial charges. Reeves' attorney, facing a documentary evidentiary record that Ames's cooperation had made comprehensive, began a discussion with the U.S. Attorney's Office regarding a plea arrangement. The conversation was neither quick nor easy, because Reeves was not a man who had built his identity on the acknowledgement of error and could not simply switch that off because the evidence required it. But the evidence required it. In March, Reeves entered a plea of guilty on 2 counts of federal program fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. The sentencing guides, given the scope of the scheme, the amounts involved, and the lack of early cooperation, pointed toward a federal custodial sentence in the range of 4 to 6 years, with additional civil forfeiture of assets connected to the fraud proceeds. His attorney, in a statement to the Register, described the plea as a decision made in the interest of his client's family. That was the last public statement made on Reeves' behalf that contained the word family, because subsequent coverage focused on the sentencing hearing, which was not a context in which family functioned as a mitigating frame. The sentencing hearing was in May. Nora did not attend. She had no legal obligation to be there and no personal need to watch it happen. She had given her documentation and her witness statement and her presence in conference rooms across a period of 7 months. And those things had done what they were designed to do, and the outcome did not require her attendance to be real. She was working a morning shift when the sentencing was announced. Marsh texted her the result: 5 years federal custody, civil forfeiture of $240,000 in traceable fraud proceeds, 5 years supervised release following custody. Pruitt received 4 years on the conspiracy charge and the document falsification count. Ames's sentencing was deferred pending the conclusion of the broader investigation into the Portland, Eugene, and Salem matters, but his cooperation agreement capped his exposure at 24 months, and his attorney expected a recommendation at the lower end. She read the text, acknowledged it with a brief reply, and went back to the patient in Bay 3 who had a laceration on his forearm from a table saw and a healthy anxiety about stitches. "You've done this before?" the man asked, watching her prepare the suture kit. "Many times," she said. "Does it hurt?" "The lidocaine injection stings a little. After that, pressure, but not much pain." He looked at the ceiling. "How do you know how to do that? Like, when did you learn?" She swabbed the area and positioned the needle. "Long time ago," she said. "Different context." "Military?" She looked at him. "How'd you know?" "The way you set everything up," he said. "My brother was a medic. He does the same thing. Everything in a specific order, everything in arm's reach before you start." She applied the local anesthetic. The man's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. "Your brother's still in?" "Got out 2 years ago, having a hard time with it." She began the first suture. "It's an adjustment," she said. "Everything moves differently on the outside. Takes a while to find the rhythm." "Did you find it?" She tied off the first stitch and moved to the second. "Most days," she said. "Some days I'm still finding it." He looked at the ceiling again while she worked, and the break room was quiet around them, and outside the window the Caldwell May was doing something pleasant with the light that she caught in her peripheral vision without looking directly at it. Sarah called in late May to say that Steel Mark's youth program had added a Thursday afternoon session to handle the enrollment increase. Marcus Tilley had been asked if he wanted to assist with the beginner youth group as a junior coach's aide, which was a volunteer role Sarah had created for older youth students who showed enough progress and enough patience for the younger kids. He had said yes. Dina texted Nora about it with 3 sentences. He said yes. He's been going 4 times a week. He told me he wants to be a coach when he's older. Nora read the text in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon and sat with it for a moment before texting back. What she wanted to say was complicated. Something about October and the way a 14-year-old had stood at the edge of the youth group with his arms crossed and his eyes on the exits, and about the specific distance between that moment and a kid who wanted to coach. What she actually texted was, "He'll be good at it," which was true and was enough. She found out about the award in June from Salas. He called her into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, which was not unusual enough to generate anticipation. She sat down across from him with the expectation of an administrative matter. "The Oregon State Nursing Association," he said, "has nominated you for their Public Service Recognition Award. The nomination was submitted by the hospital's nursing administration, with a supporting letter from Captain Hollis's office at the Caldwell PD. She looked at him. The nomination cites the injury report and subsequent cooperation with the federal investigation, Salas continued. It also cites your sustained engagement with a pediatric trauma patient that resulted in his enrollment in a therapeutic activity program. That was not therapeutic in any official sense, she said. It was a gym. The letter describes it as community-based recovery support, Salas said, with the slight dryness of a man who appreciated precision. Which is not inaccurate. She sat with the nomination for a moment. Awards made her uncomfortable in a way she had never fully articulated. Not false modesty, but a genuine uncertainty about what they were for. The things she had been done because they were the available right actions at the time, not because she was performing a role that awards recognized. There was a gap between what the recognition described and what the experience had actually been, and the gap was where the human mess of it lived. The break room calls and the parking garage conversations, and the 7 months of sustained uncertainty and the moment in the hospital waiting room when Dina Tilley had told her that Marcus had taken a bus across town by himself. You don't have to accept it, Salas said. I know. But I'm recommending that you do, not for the award itself, for what it says to the next nurse who documents something she observed and wonders whether it's worth the friction. She looked at him. Salas was not given to speeches, which made the ones he gave count. All right, she said. Good. He closed the folder. Also, I want you to know that the board has approved the injury documentation protocol revision I submitted in February. Going forward, all training-related injury admissions in this department will include a standardized inquiry into supervision conditions and facility contracts. It becomes standing procedure next month. She had not known about the protocol revision. He had not mentioned it to her during the process. She looked at the folder he had just closed. You drafted that in February, she said. I drafted it the week after you filed the original report, he said. I thought it was the right time. She drove home that evening through the Caldwell June, which was better weather than the city deserved, and which she drove through without particularly noticing, because she was thinking about protocol revisions and what they meant in terms of the next time. The next injured student who came through the emergency department and said they were fine, the next chart that triggered a cross-reference, the next chain that started with a single document and ended somewhere none of its first links could have predicted. She was not in that chain anymore, except as its origin. It had moved into the hands of federal prosecutors and departmental boards and forensic analysts and legal counsels, all of them doing the specific work of the specific roles she was not qualified for and had never claimed to be. What she had done was the piece that was hers to do, which was to see something, document it accurately, and refuse to stop telling the truth about it when the telling became costly. That was it. That was the whole of what she had done. It turned out, enough. In late June, she ran into Brandon Reese outside the hospital. She was coming off a shift at 6 in the evening, walking through the main entrance toward the parking structure, when she saw him on the bench along the hospital's front walk. He was not injured. He was sitting in the way of someone who has come to a place on purpose, but is uncertain about the specific purpose now that he is there. He stood when he saw her. His arm was at his side normally, which meant the ribs had healed as they should. He looked like a man who was holding something he needed to put down. I didn't know if you'd want to see me, he said. Why wouldn't I? He looked at the ground briefly, then back up. I should have talked to the investigators sooner. If I had, the outcome would have been the same, she said. The documentary record was sufficient. Your testimony accelerated things. Not coming forward earlier didn't break anything. It felt like it might. I know. She looked at him. What happened to you in that gym was that someone with authority told you that reporting your own injury was a worse option than living with it. That takes time to undo. The fact that you eventually told the truth is the thing that matters. He was quiet. The June evening was doing something warm around them, and the hospital's front walk had the end-of-day movement of staff changes and visitor departures. I'm looking at other gyms, he said. I still want to train. Good. Any recommendations? She thought for a moment. I know one, she said. It's in the warehouse district. The head of the youth program runs the adult classes now, too. Tell her I sent you. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and was not sure what more there was to say, which she understood because she was in the same position. Thank you, he said, for sitting with me in there when I was waiting for the imaging. Go find a good gym, she said. That's the best thanks. He left. She watched him walk down the front path toward the street and thought that 24-year-olds who had been convinced that reporting their own pain was a character flaw needed more than investigations. They needed someone to reverse the instruction, to demonstrate through the plainest possible action that the injury mattered, that the truth about it was worth saying, that the system of silence constructed around them was not a natural condition but a manufactured one, and manufactured things could be unmade. She hoped he found the gym. She thought he would. The award ceremony was in Portland in September, in a conference hall attached to a hotel near the river. It was a professional event with the standard architecture of professional events. Registration tables, name badges, a dinner with a program, a sequence of presentations. Nora wore the same suit she had worn to the Monday meeting with Marsh and Cho and Hollis, which had not been designed for award ceremonies but was appropriate for them. Hollis was in the audience, which Nora had not known in advance. She saw her from the stage and gave her a small nod, and received one back, which was sufficient. The award citation was read by the association's president, who had the particular talent for this kind of ceremony of making a specific set of facts sound exactly as significant as they actually were without inflating them. She described the injury report, the cross-reference, the investigation, the federal charges, and the protocol revision, each element in order, each one the consequence of the one before it. She did not describe the Thursday sparring session. That was not in the official record of the public service action, and Nora was glad it was not. The sparring session was a different story, the personal story, the one that involved her history and her choices and her assessment of what would and would not change the room. The official record was cleaner than that story, and also less true. But this was not the context for the whole truth, and she had made her peace with that. She accepted the award with the brief, direct statement she had written and revised 3 times in her apartment, that the documentation had been standard procedure and that the outcome was the product of investigators, attorneys, and witnesses who had done the harder parts of the work, and that what she hoped the recognition accomplished was less about her specifically and more about the value of accurate documentation in any environment where power was being misused and the injury was being told to stay quiet. People applauded. She returned to her seat. Afterward, at the reception, a young nurse from a hospital in Eugene found her near the drinks table and introduced herself with the slightly nervous energy of someone who had something specific to say. "I read about your case," the nurse said. "We had a situation at our facility last year. A trainer at a facility we were seeing injuries from. I didn't know if I should report it." "Did you?" Nora asked. "Eventually. It took me 3 months." "What happened?" "The facility's contract with the city was reviewed. They're under different oversight now." The nurse paused. "Nothing as big as your situation, but the injuries stopped." Nora looked at her. She was maybe 27, 28. She had the specific exhaustion of someone who had done a right thing at a personal cost and was still working out how to carry the weight of it alongside everything else. "The 3 months doesn't make the reporting count less," Nora said. "I know, I kept thinking, if I'd done it sooner." "The injuries that happened in those 3 months were not your fault. The person running that facility decided to create a training environment that injured people. You ended it when you ended it. That's what you did." The nurse looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, the small, real nod of someone receiving something they actually needed. They talked for another few minutes about documentation protocol and the specific challenge of training-related injuries, where the patients minimized their own condition, and then the reception moved around them, and they were separated by the ordinary drift of an event. And Nora got a glass of water and stood near the edge of the room and looked at the Portland River through the conference hall's windows. She thought about what she would tell herself in October if she could go back to the parking lot of Hargrove Memorial and read Dina Tilley's text again. He finally agreed to try the youth martial arts program. Tonight is his first class. He's terrified. She would go. That part was not in question. She would go because Marcus needed someone in the room who would say something, and because she was capable of saying something, and because the distance between being capable of a thing and choosing not to do it is a distance that compounds over time. What she would tell herself about what came after, the 7 months in the conference rooms, and the defamation suit in the November parking garage, and the text from Brandon Reese. She was not sure she would tell herself anything because she had learned most of what she needed to learn from the experience itself. The learning was in the doing of it. The doing of it was what it was. She had spent 4 years in the army understanding what she was capable of in extreme conditions. And then she had spent 3 years in a hospital learning what that capability looked like, applied to the ordinary persistent emergency of people who were sick and afraid and needed someone competent and honest to stay in the room with them. The gym on the edge of the warehouse district had been somewhere between those two things. Not a combat zone, not a hospital, but a place where someone with power was using it to compress the people around him until they became smaller than they were, and where stopping him required neither a weapon nor a medical degree, but simply the refusal to accept that the room's current arrangement was the only possible arrangement. That refusal was not courage. Courage was a thing people named after the fact, applied to moments that had been, in real time, nothing more than a calculation. This is wrong, and I am capable of saying so, and the cost of saying so is lower than the cost of staying quiet. She made that calculation, and she said so, and the room changed. That was what she carried out of it. Not the award in its presentation case, not the federal charges, not the protocol revision. All of those were real and mattered. But the simpler thing underneath all of it, that accurate documentation in the right hands at the right time, is not a passive act. It is an intervention. It is the quietest available form of a thing that needs doing, which is telling the truth about what is actually happening to people who need the truth in order to act. She had been a medic before she was a nurse. She understood intervention. She understood that the moment you identify a wound is not the moment you consider whether it is your business to treat it. The wound is the business. The wound is always the business. She finished her water and set the glass down on a nearby table and retrieved her jacket from the coat check and walked out into the Portland September, which was doing something with the river light that was genuinely beautiful in a way she let herself look at for a full minute before she hailed a car to the airport. The flight back to Caldwell was an hour. She slept for 40 minutes of it, the deep and easy sleep of someone who was genuinely tired and had nothing outstanding to hold against the dark. She landed. She drove home through the Caldwell night. She put her jacket over the chair and the award on the shelf next to the topographical map, where it looked neither out of place nor like the most important thing in the room. She set her alarm for 5:30. She had a shift in the morning. There was always a shift in the morning, and she was always glad for it. The specific, irreducible, human work of staying in the room with people who needed someone to stay. That had been true in the army, and it was true in the hospital, and it was true on a Tuesday in October when she drove to a gym in the warehouse district instead of going home, and it would be true tomorrow, and the day after, for as long as she had the capacity to do it. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to find out what they are made of. Nora Voss had known for years. The harder thing, the thing that took longer to learn, was knowing what to build with it. She had spent a year learning that. She was not finished learning, but she knew the direction, and the direction was enough.